Today, my wife and I are visiting Colonial Williamsburg, an amazing living history museum in Virginia that tells the early part of America's enduring story. Come along with me and my wife as we explore a history buff's paradise. That's coming up next.
Wood pulp paper doesn't come along until mid-19th century, 1849, 1850. The Germans figured out how to extract cellulose. Wow. So, rag is it. The charm of rag paper, the downside of rag paper is extremely expensive. The upside of rag paper is it doesn't just fall apart and go away.
Oh, interesting.
It's good for thousands of years.
Wow.
We keep a piece around here somewhere that it was here when I left a while ago. Here. Now keep in mind, I've been here for over 40 years now. And when I came here, this piece of paper was in this folder, and it was perfectly rectangular, and it was crisp on the edges and clean. It's been handled to 300,000 people over the past 30 or 40 years. Yet it still retains a little.
Wow.
And that was printed in July of 1483.
Can we touch it?
It just feels like paper. Nothing remarkable.
When was this printed, you said?
1483.
14? No, this piece of paper?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was well over 500 years old. And it's been abused. Yeah, well, it was made in Europe and printed in Europe.
Wow.
Printing wasn't much of an industry until the 1480s. It wasn't born until 1450 in Germany. So, you find that within 20 or 30 years, most European countries had, at least in as big as cities, had some printing going on. And that is the concept of movable type. They could print with engraved plates, and they printed with wood blocks and that sort of thing. But they didn't have, metal type that you could take apart and put back together in a multitude of ways.
The Gutenberg press would have been...
Mainz.
When would the Gutenberg press?
1450.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. I didn't know.
So
Yeah,
what were some of the common materials used to bind books?
Materials?
Yeah.
The one material that's you've got to have for a book to be considered bound is leather. If there's no leather on a book, it's not a binding. And you could go to Barnes and Noble right now and you won't find a book on a shelf in there that's done in leather.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason? Books aren't worth covering in leather anymore. If a book was worth a week's pay, you could justify using leather to protect that size of an investment.
Yeah.
But when a book is hardly worth pocket change, you're not going to, add something that would contribute twice as much as the book is worth to the cost of it. A book like this one, in most stores, would be used as an account book because everybody was buying on credit, just like you do today. And that's where that was recorded.
This wouldn't be bound.
No leather on that book. That's what we call a pamphlet. And that particular pamphlet, or a stitch book, and that one, somebody just opted to have a decorative piece of paper, which I could teach somebody to do in 10 minutes. So it just makes it look a little nicer than the same book done like that.
Yeah, but what about paperbacks? Do they use wood to them? What about the paperbacks?
Paperbacks usually had wood, but you do have paperback books that were throwaway books. There were blank pages, and that might be where you recorded all your primary information and you pass that on to your bookkeeper who would transfer the information to a more permanent ledger. And when that book was filled up, you might keep it just to have a copy of it, or you might throw it away. Chances are good that if you're 8 or 10, your parents probably still think you're cute. What we wait for is, usually we take an apprentice on at 13 or 14. Now, if there's an age at which your parents are most willing to get rid of you,
It's at 13 or 14.
it's 13 or 14. A whole lot easier to negotiate that deal.
How would you dot a paper?
Pardon me?
How would you dye paper?
Oh, that's really easy to do. Have you ever made paste? No? You never played with paper mache? I guess people don't do that in our classes anymore. Well, paste is made from 2 ingredients, flour and water. You take 1 part flour, you add 5 parts water to it, and you stir it up and boil it. You heat it until it boils. When it gets to boiling, it thickens to like pudding. Now, if you take that water before you start making the paste and you add a dye to it, you end up using colored water to make the paste, you end up with colored paste. Then it's like paper mache, or not paper mache, but it's like finger paint. You can take a brush and you can brush it nice and liberally onto a piece of paper. What we create the pattern or the design with is a little homemade simple cone. So I'd put it on a flat surface, I'd brush it out, and if this were a tabletop, I would simply take that and just do that to it. Just drag that across the surface to scratch the design. Hang it over a string for an hour or 2 to dry, and you're in business.
Were there a certain clientele that would, a certain class of society that would have books bound more than other classes, or was there a particular type of book that was bound more often than other types?
No, most any substantial book in terms of size, say a book 200 or 300 pages, is going to ultimately be bound. I mean, you don't generally find paperbacks of large size. Most paperbacks are well under 100 pages long, and that way you can use it all and just punch holes through the side of it and tie it together as a bundle. You get anything bigger than that, you're going to have to sew it in a more traditional fashion as you would prepare in a binding, and that's simply not going to work unless you put a cover on it of some sort.
Sure.
Now, I mean, you can still make the book cheaper. You can take, for example, and use sheepskin on the spine and then just cover the rest of it with a decorative paper. This book here, for example, is what we call a quarter binding. You're going to find that the corners tend to go pretty fast, so the next step up the ladder might be to add little corner pieces like this one has, in which case you'd have a book that was half bound. Or you cover it entirely, and even within the fully bound books, the price is going to vary because you have different degrees of quality. Sheepskin is the cheapest, and as a consequence, it's the most commonly used. Calfskin is twice as expensive, but it's going to last about 4 times longer. And then the best leather on earth is this stuff over here in color. It's called Moroccan leather. It's goat skin coming out of North Africa, usually Morocco or Nigeria. And that leather there is about 5 times more expensive than calf. So it's synonymous with gold. You're not going to see anybody buying a book like that merely to, make an ordinary product out of it. If you're going to spend that kind of money, you're going to do something to impress your friends and neighbors. So that's the kind of book you'd see all dolled up with embellishment. I mean, we have a couple over here, 2 that survived from the shop that we know of was the charter to the College of William and Mary. This is done with red Moroccan. And the other is what we find was written in New York and shipped down here and produced for William Byrd. He had 2 copies of this book made, called The Conspiracy to Burn the City of New York. And, a book like that would cost an average man maybe 6 months' wages or more. So you don't see average people buying books like this. It's extraordinarily rich people. And even then, the book is generally going to have to mean something special. Maybe the family Bible. You couldn't publish a Bible in English in America, so you import it from England. You might choose to import it in sheet so that you can have a local binder who you might have a little influence with, or be able to at least have some input into the design of the book, and have him put it together for you. Or you could buy it fully finished. It just depends on you. But books like that were, they really weren't practical. They were bought and dolled up primarily to flaunt their wealth. A Bible's a great book for that because you don't have to have an excuse to carry it in public. And everybody that sees it knows what it represents in terms of value because everybody's seen them before and appreciates what they are. Not that many people own them because they were just too expensive, and then you have the literacy problems, and you have the factor that I don't think you had any more devoutness in the religion then than you have today. I mean, everybody had to go to church because you were simply required by law or you'd be fined. So that doesn't mean that you're religious. That just means you're complying with the It's a lot of rich people would tend to just pay off their fines on an annual basis, and that way just didn't have to worry about going to church. But the little farmer, he's probably going to trudge to church every Sunday with all of his tithings, slaves, kids, any relatives that are living with him. But that doesn't mean he's going to have a Bible reading on it.
Thank you.
I mean, people really started breaking out the checkbook and buying Bibles in the 1860s and 70s when wood pulp paper first introduced, and the price of books just plummets. Because from the perspective of the average person or the average consumer, the book didn't change. I mean, it still looked like a book, felt like a book, worked like a book. You know, the paper looked every bit as good as rag paper, but it was made from wood pulp. And of course, that paper self-destructs in a relatively short period of time. So by the 1920s or so, you started seeing books showing signs of really deteriorating. And the alarms went off, and people discussed it a little bit. But, you know, books had always, throughout their history, been an elitist product. So a lot of people were held back simply because they didn't have any real way of educating themselves or having access to reading materials. All of a sudden, women and children became a demographic that publishers were clamoring to get the eye of because books became so cheap you could buy them with pocket change. And there was a real rush on buying Bibles at the time. You know, there's people that never owned one but always wanted to, could buy beautiful books. I mean, the books were just gorgeous. They were really well made. It's just the paper was garbage. And they didn't know that. You know, they just knew that it was made from wood. It was cheap, but it, for all intents and purposes, looked like paper, felt like paper, worked like paper. So when it started falling apart, the assessment was, we're going to stick with it. We're going to stick with junk, primarily because everybody has access to it. There's not a single person in the country today that can claim they can't read because they didn't have access to books. You can get them for nothing. So, you know, it's kind of a done deal, a no-brainer. Go back to the elitist way, and only rich people have education.
Well, that's a wrap for this Colonial Williamsburg video. I hope you really enjoyed it, getting to see another part of this amazing living history museum. If you like this sort of stuff, check out my other videos. Check out colonialwilliamsburg.org to plan your own visit here, because it's so much cooler in real life than it is on film. Till next time, this is History Buff, TN Photobug signing out, and I'm having a blast with the past.